Welcome, everybody. My name's Andy Dougal. I'm a Professor of Environmental Sustainability and the Dean of the Faculty of Sciences at the University of York. So it's my pleasure to just act as a host for today's session, as well as those roles. So obviously from the environmental sustainability side, I'm very interested and a very concerned environmental academic myself. As Dean of a faculty which includes all science departments, including computer science, environment and geography, biology, who you will hear from respondents who are linked to those departments today. We've got a real concern and a real emphasis on trying to improve the university's environmental footprint. So partly this is, I'll be listening in to feed into the university executive and try and reduce our impact in terms of guidance to the 25,000 plus members of the university community, but also keen for us all to learn as individuals as to how we can use AI in the most responsible and environmentally sustainable way. So our speakers are the real experts today, so I won't take too much more of your time. Please use the Q&A box at the base of the Zoom screen. That will be one way that we add in new content. We've also got a lot of questions that you've sent in before. So please make this as interactive as possible, and I really look forward to summing up at the end. But for now, I'm going to pass over to Tom Stoneham, a professor of philosophy at the university and one of the members of the very active cross-disciplinary groups we have around artificial intelligence. So over to you, Tom.
Great. Thanks, Andy. So welcome, everyone. As Andy said, I'm a professor of philosophy, a subject which has a long history of engaging with the possibility of artificial intelligence. And I'm also ethics lead for York's UKRI-funded Centre for Doctoral Training in Safe AI Systems. And it's a great pleasure to host this panel today. I'm going to begin by introducing our three speakers, and then I'm going to ask them each to do a bit of a position statement to give us their initial take on the question that we're addressing today: is environmentally sustainable AI possible? And then we'll move on to the audience questions. We've had several submitted. I'll select from them initially, but if more questions come into the Q&A, we'll consider those as well. We're unlikely to be able to answer every question, but we'll try to get to the ones which keep us having a broad-ranging and interesting discussion. So first up, I'd like to introduce Meghna Asthana, who did her PhD in computer science here at York in 2024. She's an AI researcher and thought leader focused on the intersection of artificial intelligence, climate technology, and sustainability. She holds a PhD in AI and climate tech, followed by a 2-year postdoctoral fellowship advancing the use of machine learning for environmental solutions. As the founder of learning platform Ahead of the Curve, she engages a global audience with insights on responsible innovation, AI innovation, advocating for technologies that not only push the boundaries, but also safeguard the planet's future. Welcome, Meghna. Our second alumni is Dr. Justin Byrne. He did a BSc in biology in 2015 at York and an MSc in biology in 2017. He's an ecologist at AI Dash, I think is the right way to read it, with expertise in integrating technology into conservation. He leads ecological validation teams for international AI-powered biodiversity products and contributes to model development, ensuring regulatory compliance. With a PhD in ecology from Newcastle University, Justin combines scientific expertise with commercial experience. He's published research on ESG frameworks and supply chain monitoring and helps shape relevant ISO standards. And from York faculty, we have Dr. KP Parkhill, who is a reader in human geography. Their research interests span energy geographies and geographies of risk. They use qualitative methods to explore how the public engages with or resists notions of low-carbon lifestyles and low-carbon transitions, including how they consume and perceive energy themselves. They're a Fellow of the Royal Geographical Society with the Institute of British Geographers and chair of the Energy Geographies Working Group. So welcome all of you. As I say, I'm about to ask you to do a position statement, but for the audience first, I just want to raise one important point to help inform the discussion. Now you've heard about our interesting panelists. We framed the topic in terms of this very general term, AI. I expect in the audience, people have had very different experiences and understandings of what might come under that term. And most of us have encountered consumer or facing AI in versions of chatbots and other tools integrated into the technologies we use every day. And this is a very important and ubiquitous feature of AI, often just called generative AI. But there are many other technologies which are AI, which use similar machine learning techniques. And we're very lucky to have experts in those areas with us as well. And so in the discussion, we'll try to be as clear as we can about the different sorts of technologies we're talking about when we talk about AI. So I'm going to hand over to the panel in order first. So Meghna, would you tell us, do you think environmentally sustainable AI is possible?
Well, I would say it is technically possible, but only if we fundamentally think about how models are built and deployed. And I think there needs to be a systematic change across regulation and government and how corporates think about it before we can really think about a green future while building growing AI companies. So I think it's just technically possible. Yeah.
Thank you. Great answer. Justin.
I think that AI, be it generative AI, machine learning, or image classification models, present huge opportunities for protecting the environment and scaling our response to the combined environmental and climate crisis. I agree completely with Meghna that in order to do that, is going to have to be huge changes to how we power these systems, but that they are essential for meeting those massive crises.
Great, thank you. KP.
Okay, so I'm not an expert in AI. So first of all, caveat here, I have probably a fairly lay perspective on AI and understanding of it, given my expertise is in public and stakeholder attitudes. But I can tell you that it's often framed as a bit of a paradox, net zero goals versus AI. And what I can also sort of say is it needs to be. Certainly work we've done previously with publics and others suggests that environmental sustainability and that value of environmental sustainability is really important to people. But I also suspect that there is a lack of fully understanding what the environmental implications of AI and the various different aspects of AI are at the moment. And a bit similar to what we've seen with energy, there's a sort of a gap in understanding of where we get our energy from and our energy needs. There might be a similar gap in understanding of the sort of infrastructures that are required that underpin the likes of AI, and there might be growing resistance to those infrastructures, particularly if it's not seen as being environmentally sustainable.
Excellent, thank you. And that beautifully moves us on to what I think we should start by addressing from the audience questions, which is exactly what the environmental impact of the AI systems being developed at the moment is in terms of their energy use, the types of energy they're using, and their water use. Meghna, would you be able, this is closer to your area, would you be able to say something about that?
So in terms of sorry, could you repeat like what exactly?
So I think it's not always clear to people why AI has such large environmental impact.
Right.
You look at the bot on your phone, and why is that so much more damaging for the environment than sending a WhatsApp message?
Yeah, so basically these models, whenever you need to train a model, you need to have a lot of data that is involved in training these models. And these models need these big data structures which these big companies have, and they are very much energy intensive. They need a lot of energy in terms of in terms where they are not basically green in most of the areas. So that's why when people say that AI is energy intensive, it's basically the training process and keeping that data alive, saving that data, what they are trained on. That's what basically is creating that much of unsustainable things.
Excellent, thank you. And there's a lot of energy demand in the training and the running of the data centers, which are used for the
Yes.
training, and also
Yes.
the delivery, that quick delivery. We're also used to very fast delivery. What do we know, KPs, this is probably more in your area, the sorts of energy sources that are available in the countries where these data centers are housed, and what's happening as this demand grows?
So I don't fully know about all of that aspect. What I do know is obviously in the UK we do have goals of getting to net zero, and the way that we're currently pursuing that, according to government policy, is through renewable energy systems. So things like wind, onshore and off, solar power, and also a fairly robust signal from government that they want more nuclear power. I think, often what's brought up by publics and others in relation to renewable energy sources is things like intermittency and those sorts of things, and whether we can have security of supply given increasing demand. So I think that probably is a challenge. I don't think we fully unite all of those dots up at the moment. Often these sorts of different components of the energy system are treated like that, almost separate. They are interconnected but separate, and we probably need to do a lot more of that. So I suspect that some of the key parts of this is around renewable energy and the role that that could play.
Thank you. Yes, renewable energy is a really important source, but also conversations going on about nuclear at the moment as well. And so there's very large energy demands. Do we have a sense as a panel what the scale of those demands, that energy demand, is at the moment?
My understanding is that it's the total demand of these data centers, really, because those data centers may be employed for AI purposes and lots of different kinds of AI purposes, is kind of comparable with moderate sized countries. Although I don't have exact figures, and with expectations that it is going to grow. And I've heard on ranges of estimates on what that growth would look like, ranging from, I don't know, moderate growth to eclipsing the entire energy production of the planet in a small number of years. So, but we're such an early stage that I do think even things that sound ridiculous should be taken seriously when we think about where this might go. And I'm sure we'll touch on it, but it's important to remember that it's not just the energy use of AI of these data centers that's important. I'm based in York. I imagine many of the panel are, and we've just had our very, very dry summer, and water usage is a huge part of these data centers due to how they are cooled, because computing needs to be cooled to be kept efficient, and most of that is through evaporating water, and then that water is lost from the system, from the hydrological system. So that's very important. And even when we solve those problems, which seem like mostly engineering problems, we have the fundamental issue that these systems break and need to be replaced, they need to be created, and the material cost of that production is not evenly distributed across the world and is concentrated on areas where that creates additional sustainability problems.
Yeah, excellent points. Yeah, so the energy demand is huge and rising. I think last year each of Google, Meta, Apple, Amazon, and Microsoft each of them used as much enough energy to put them in the top 100 countries in the world. So collectively, it is a vast amount. But this water question is an interesting one, a less obvious one. And perhaps, Justin, you could just elaborate a little bit why the water demand is so high.
Yeah, I think it's surprisingly high. Even I am bulk at it when I was looking over some figures today. If any of you, all of you using your computers will know, especially if you've got laptops, that sometimes they get hot, and that's because any computing power is a process of turning electricity into heat in a very inefficient way. So all computing systems produce heat, and these very densely packed computing clusters, these data centers, produce lots of heat. And machines work most efficiently, computers work most efficiently when they're at low temperatures. So in order to get the best efficiency out of these data centers and the highest productivity out of these data centers, they need to be cooled. And the most effective way of doing that cooling, that the industry has so far found and that suits their purposes, is evaporative cooling, where either the heat will be transferred through a liquid medium into water, which evaporates off and cools very effectively. We all know sweating is a very effective way of cooling. It's a known solution to heat problems, or just by kind of piping water to be up to a metal plate very close to the the CPU or the GPU or the TPU, which then takes that heat away and eventually evaporates. And because that water is not recycled, it's not something that the AI data centers are required to do at the moment, or the designed or engineered to do, or maybe that's physically just something that isn't possible. That water is lost, and that can exacerbate issues of drought or water supply, which we know are huge issues around the world and in New York.
I mean, this is a great point to talk about, because thinking forward, things are changing with the technologies, and this is a recognized problem because data centers are causing water loss. They're also changing the pricing structure of water for farmers in countries where they've been cited. On a positive note, since we do have people from York here, a very small, by these standards, data center has been given planning permission in York, over by the Vanguard Stadium, and that uses closed loop cooling, where rather than the water evaporating, the water that's being used to cool the equipment will then be pumped across the road and under the swimming pool to heat the water in the swimming pool. And so these are the sort of environmentally less damaging solutions that can be used. But they're, as Justin rightly mentioned, they are very expensive. Meghna, do you have anything from your more global perspective on the water issue, particularly, or the local impacts of data centers?
Well, I've been working in multiple geographies, but I'm honestly not sure because I don't really work, adjacent or like in tandem with the data center people. So yeah, that I would say I am not really aware of the issues.
So one of the questions that's come up on the screen and is also was referred to in the pre-meeting questions, which I think would be good, especially since we do have someone from the geography department here as well, though I know you're a human geographer, KP, but it's about the materials that go into building this and the mining. So this is another large area of environmental impact. KP, is this something you are able to comment on?
So I don't know about the facts and figures related to this. In fact, I wanted to ask Justin if this was a sort of a big issue, because we know with other aspects of so let's say the energy system, that the materials and minerals and elements, are something that we need to be really careful with. And what a lot of human geographers and others more social science people are thinking about in relation to these sorts of developments and transitions is around equity and justice, and that whatever we come up with needs to be equitable and just for all involved, and that we cannot keep undertaking innovations and solutions that localize disbenefits on particular groups or areas. So, one thing that comes to mind, and again, I'm not an expert exactly in this, is thinking about the push for battery storage, and that mining lithium can be actually really incredibly dangerous if not done correctly, and bearing in mind, the workers' rights and health and so on. So I was actually going to chip in and ask Justin if that was a kind of a key aspect in relation to AI and data centers as well. And I guess if anyone knows of any sort of regulations or policies or moves to try and make sure these things are developed in an equitable and just fashion. I'll throw it back to you all. Sorry.
Justin, do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, no, I think one of the things that I imagine Meghna and I are both going to face is that working on the as we all have to face is that the knowledge about what is going on in this supply chain and what's going on in this process is very obfuscated. And if you work on the delivery end, like I imagine Meghna and I both work on, where we are thinking about building models and using the computing power of these things, it's not transparent that what is going into that behind the scenes. I looking at the facts and figures today was surprised by what's being reported, and I also don't think we really have good information on that, because as we've seen, we've often got estimates that are based on worst case scenarios, and it's not clear to the degree to which the industry is towards that extreme or another extreme. But I do think those things should be taken seriously. So in terms of e-waste, where I probably lie on this is that so much of what we do, and so much of our economy, so much of our culture relies on extremely high consumption activity, and AI is one of them. It's something that I think that lots of these different issues like energy, materials, and water should be treated separately. But on this one, I think that we exist in a culture of extreme materials consumption that is not sustainable, and AI is part of that problem, and needs to face the same kinds of regulation and changes in culture that we need to face everywhere. I imagine the materials that go into producing these CPUs and processing units are maybe not exactly the same as batteries, but there are probably strong parallels in the fact that the materials are probably mined in developing countries where in poor conditions, in poor pay, and wreak extreme environmental damage in those areas. I think that's almost a certainty. Although I don't have any, that's not an area that I specifically work in. It's probably also true to say that our mobile phones and computers and everything else that we're doing, everything we're using to have this conversation also depends on those supply chains, which I don't want to say to minimize the genuine impact of AI in that process, but I do think that specific question is just as much about one of how we approach almost every aspect of the modern digital society as it is specifically a problem of AI. I think that there are serious efforts. I was just trying to pull up. I've been going over some reports on this. I think there are voluntary code of conducts that are coming in about sourcing energy materials for data centers that are kind of emerging right now, and that's the stage we're at in terms of regulation. That we are getting the starts of sustainability regulation in the EU, especially, but beginning to produce standards on this and best practice guidance. But we're way far behind. I think maybe it was one of was it? I was reading some of the panel's blogs, and there was talks about how regulation is always late, and I think that that's where we're going to be, and I think materials is part of that much wider problem and isn't one that's going to be solved in the same way as water and energy, which in theory are just engineering problems. Just make it more efficient, just make it renewable, just make the water circular. In theory, you can solve it, but the fact that things break and we have a very poor recycling system for technology products generally is a big issue that we face everywhere.
Right, that's a fantastically useful answer, and I think I want to move on from data centers and that side of things in a minute, but there is a question in the chat about the location of them, and I'm just going to say a few words about that just so we kind of get a sense of the scale of the problem. So the data centers we're talking about are located everywhere, all around the world. They have to be located near, typically they're located near to transatlantic or cross-sea data cables and near to centers of population because they want fast connection and low latency. To give a sense of the scale, in Ireland, there's now a ban on building new data centers after a big public protest, but the energy consumption of the data centers in the Republic of Ireland is now roughly the same as the energy consumption of every domestic dwelling in the whole country. That is just one country. And in the UK, we're going through a process of, we're in the early stages of a process of building a large number of new data centers. Several have been approved in around Northumberland and Tyneside, and some of those will be powered by small-scale nuclear reactors. And there is a proposal in to build one next to Drax using the extra capacity that Drax currently has and the water from the Ouse. So these are coming to us. They will come to us and our communities soon, so we need to be aware of them and think hard about their impacts. But anyway, great discussion about that. I would like to move on though to something a little bit more positive. Having had the gloomy stuff about this, we have two people in the panel who are using AI in the broad sense, in positive and constructive ways, and a part of that more general movement we sometimes hear a lot about, which is, well, yes, these systems do have an environmental impact, but they may also help us solve or at least mitigate the climate crisis. So I'd like to move over to Meghna first to talk a little bit about positive uses of AI technologies in environmental and climate contexts.
Right, thank you. So basically, when I was working at the Alan Turing Institution, we were working with a lot of national institute like the British Antarctic Survey and CFAS and multiple organizations, UK Hydrology, so I think UK ECH, something like that. And they all have been using some kind of AI or say machine learning algorithms to make their prediction systems a lot better. So there was one project where these ecologists at CFAS, so that's Center for like fisheries and everything, and they used to use these computer vision models to detect how the flow of the ocean is. So how the flora and fauna is there, and is it growing, is it declining? So that was one of my projects there. And I understand that AI has its like sustainability issues, but we are over there used to use it for a lot of positive aspects. There are a lot of startups as well that are working on solar grid management. So like how to use the solar panel energy that comes on and how to maintain grid stability. So we have done quite a number of work over there as well. And definitely there's some projects in British Antarctic Survey where they are predicting polar ice ice caps and how they're melting and how they're increasing the water level. So there's a lot of ecological positive impact projects that are going on, and those are powered by AI.
Oh, that's great, and it's lovely to hear that. And Justin, do you have some examples?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that it's really important to realize that especially machine learning has been part of our scientific approach for many, many years now. All of our climate models and climate modeling, involves these machine learning models, and that's how we are better understanding the climate so that we can we can so we can try to solve these challenges. Specifically, the work that my company is involved with centers around a few issues. So AI is really good at scaling problems. You can train a person to solve a few problems a day or whatever. It's usually a process that solves, but you can train an AI with that same process, and it can solve thousands of those problems a day. And it's just really invaluable for for going through evidence and data sets that are huge. So particularly, I use AI in two areas. With my PhD, I used it for understanding the environmental genome of ancient woodland in the UK. But in my current role, I mostly use it for remote sensing, so that's satellite observation. And it's really so how we use AI is to do things like, especially, is to detect the risk factors around fire spreading in the US. So our company monitors a large portion of the US fire energy grid and detects situations automatically, over this huge areas where there might be risks of wildfire from a tree or vegetation falling onto that power line that could then cause a massive wildfire in the middle of nowhere. So rather than doing that by hand, we can automate that process and prevent large wildfires. And this wildfire risk modeling over really large spaces is powered by AI, and you couldn't do it in any other way. Equally, my specific area is around biodiversity offsetting, and we are able to do habitat classification of land using AI processes in a way that would again not be scalable in any way using human resources. So by doing that, you can then have a much better understanding of the biodiversity of an area and start trying to solve problems in those areas or minimize impacts of development. So you can say you can't develop there, or you shouldn't develop there because the biodiversity impacts are going to be too high. And those scalable problems where you need to look over huge geographic areas and answer many questions in a very short period of time are not possible through other approaches. So there are loads of things like that. But I think those are machine learning examples, image classification models of AI that we kind of have put on a shelf of good things. But there's also this generative AI where we're a bit more, is that a good use of our time? And I actually am one of the people in the ecology sector who's quite positive about the use of those, because all across the world, we're facing a resource shortage, a capacity shortage of environmental professionals to go out and do conservation work. Large amounts of their time are taken up with important administrative duties that can be outsourced to AI and generative AI processes, machine learning process, language models, that kind of thing. And I do think, and I know this is a very corporate thing to say, but the productivity gains that free up the time of our experts to do more hands-on conservation ecology work, especially environmental work, or whatever it is that they're doing to try and solve problems for the environment, and is really important. Taking those people and letting them focus on the things that only they can do and only they have the skills to do is a really important part of addressing and scaling up our response to the biodiversity crisis.
Thanks. That's really. Can I just ask you a personal question now, Justin? Do you use generative AI tools in your workflow?
I do. I do feel guilty about it though, because but no, I do, mostly because so there are lots of things. I really would encourage people to think of generative AI as the equivalent of an intern or a secretary. Most may in my brain I go 50 years ago, everyone at our level of, say, management structure experience would probably have had a personal assistant, and we live in a work culture today where we don't have those things, and that productivity loss of having to organize your own time and organize documents is actually a huge productivity loss that we could be being more efficient by having basically that equivalent. And the kinds of tasks that I use language models for tend to be tasks where there's a large amount of information that needs to be synthesized, and I would like a equivalent of an intern's perspective on that piece of work. And I wouldn't take that as the final draft, but it is very good. And it is actually really good at synthesizing data. So if you have data in one format, say spread across multiple tables in a document, and you would do a task that would be equivalent to saying, can you pull that into one table and give me some headline results? Language models are really good at doing that, and that kind of stuff is where they don't tend to hallucinate very much. They don't tend to make mistakes. So I would say that productivity gain is really big, and I think that because of that, I don't see a world where we're going to be moving away from AI, because productivity is a really important thing for the UK economy that everyone's talking about a lot. And so, not that I'm not morally, I don't think that's the thing, but I think in the society we live in, the productivity gains from AI are too big for the government to disincentivize its use.
That's really interesting. Thank you. And I think finding where it fits in the workflow, and these are systemic business level decisions rather than, I think one of the issues at the moment is it's being pushed out to people and they're meant to work out how to do something with it.
Yeah, and I absolutely do think that part of our growing response to AI will have to be a maturity about when it is ethical to use these resources and when it isn't. And large amounts of these resources are being devoted to activities that are like of low societal value or objectionable societal value, especially around the image creation and what that all the negative things that can entail. And I think there is a question about, do we as a society think that it is ethical to allow this very resource intensive tool to be used for very frivolous activities, and should that be something as a society that we decide we don't want to do?
I think that's great, and it's worth flagging up. Image generation is at least one, if not two, orders of magnitude more energy intensive at the inference level when you put in the demand than text-based tasks. Interestingly, also mathematical tasks, numerical tasks are very, very energy intensive because it's a language model, not a maths model, and so it has to take very roundabout routes for that. KP, you're a qualitative research, you do qualitative research, you work with qualitative data a lot. Have you, what tools do you use for analyzing that? Have you found space for AI in that? And do you have thoughts about where that might go?
I think we're grappling with this right now. So I don't use AI at the moment, but it doesn't mean I shouldn't or couldn't. We have had interesting discussions around, if you've got large interview data sets, can you use AI to pull out kind of key themes and those sorts of things? Because often, not to say we only do this, but we often do what's called a thematic analysis, and we'll use tools like a piece of software called Vivo, where you manually put the transcripts in and you will code it and create themes from that. And then it can nicely pull it out into a document for you. But you could use potentially, I think, AI to do that job. I suppose what's difficult is, what are the parameters that you would use to sort of tell it what themes to look for, or which data to include and exclude. Because in qualitative work, we don't just go on like number of times something is said, or prevalence in terms of 25 interviewees said this one thing. We also might want to look at instances that are have only been said once or twice, but it's nuanced, it's different, it shows a different perspective or understanding or an angle of an issue. And could AI pick up on that? Would it know? And I honestly don't know the answers to all these, and we're grappling with it. Would it know how to interpret themes? And often themes are informed by concepts and theories from literature that we're thinking about. Could it do that? And I think often, I'm guessing that has a lot to do with how we train these things and what it's pulling from and the processing power. And I suppose, something I think we're grappling at the university and universities across the world, I suspect, is what role should AI play in education? We can't put it back in the box in a lot of ways. So are we upskilling our students in how to use AI, how to use it so they get the best out of it? When is it ethical to use it? I think, what Justin was saying earlier was really important. What are the sort of sustainable implications, sustainability implications of using AI? But also I wanted to sort of come back to something about, frivolous use of AI. We're talking a lot about workflow, and I can see in so many different ways how it's incredibly helpful. And I think it's probably easy to go down the route of going, that's a good use of AI, but, and I'm not saying you were saying this, Justin, but like a frivolous use of AI is kind of as a consumer scanning, trying to think of the advert, the scan, I won't say the company, but the advert where they're scanning beauty products and which is the best one. That's frivolous, right? And I think on the surface, it absolutely seems that way, right? It feels like that. But then I think about people who are socially isolated, who are vulnerable, who don't have networks to pull upon, and that actually, that not specifically that example perhaps, but sometimes using AI on our various smartphones and what have you, could be a really good way for those people to feel connected, to feel like they've got ideas to bounce off something. And then I think we then get into obviously a really important area around ethics and what's the appropriate way for AI to respond to certain queries. But I think it could have a really positive social use, even though it might on the surface seem a bit frivolous, if that makes sense. Sorry, I've sort of.
No, yeah, I think so. I want to make sure Meghna's got a chance to say if she wants to say on it. I've got loads that I want to say, but I don't want to talk on my own forever.
So basically, when it comes to like the frivolous use of AI, I think a lot of people are definitely doing it, but like I want to talk about my platform ahead of the curve. So we did a research study, like a questionnaire study from all these people who are following us, and they are basically students and young professionals. And what they are actually doing is they're just using ChatGPT or these things to just copy and paste like their assignments, and they're not even trying to hide that. So I think that's frivolous use, and also they are hindering their education. So I'm not really sure how do we tackle that as universities, or how do we tackle that as like institutions. So that's my take on the frivolous side.
Thanks. That's a really good point. Were you going to respond to that, Justin?
Yeah, no, I think that I completely agree that it is when we enter into discussions about how either especially governments should determine what is what is value, what's valuable use of something, that can be really challenging. When is it frivolous and when it isn't. I think there are things that we probably all can agree are things that shouldn't be. We should definitely try and disincentivize. I think we can agree that like illegal activity, this damaging trend of kind of deep fake images, that all of that kind of stuff should, we should pursue every opportunity to regulate that into impossibility, as much as we can within data centers that we have control over. My aunt sent 3 pictures of her and my uncle and my cousin in different art styles. I don't think that probably was a very good use of the 2 or 3 gallons of water that it took to produce those things. And so I think that we maybe need to have a bit of a mature discussion, educating the public about the impact of fun AI activities. That's one thing, and this fits into that broader, slightly patronizing discussion about maybe you should delete all your old emails because of the data center implications. But there is some level of mature discussion that we hopefully as a society can have. I think the other thing, which is a culture thing that I've really brought into my workspace, or tried to bring my workspace, is that if you are an AI company, or you are a company that's doing AI, not every problem needs to be solved with AI. Like we're all people who have a vaguely science background, and we know that there's a large range of models that we can employ, statistical models that we can employ to solve problems that AI can also solve. And just because we can use AI to solve one of those problems, doesn't mean that we always should. And that's where we get to this very strange trend where, by companies that are firing large amounts of their teams to replace them with AI, maybe acting prematurely, and probably very, very often simple approaches to solving problems are more effective and energy efficient than chucking an AI, even if AI can solve them.
Great. Yes, I think that's absolutely right. Kind of conscious use of AI. We've got to know when it is the right tool and when it's just the tool that feels convenient. KP.
Sorry, I did the whole old school thing and have a hand
No,
up.
that's okay. That
But
was more of energy efficient.
I was thinking though, we often don't have a choice to opt in to AI or opt out, right? So if I'm thinking about, a search engine, probably a lot of us use, and of course we can change search engines for starters, but you almost automatically, I think you do automatically now get an AI summary of it, which can be immensely helpful, but we're not even opting in at that point to those sorts of things. I also don't think, and I certainly wasn't aware of the actual cost, if you like, and I don't mean economic, I mean that water cost that you've just said, Justin, and the discussions we've had around energy, but what it is costing each time we do these things. And I think, that would be helpful information for some people and would prompt them to avoid using AI in circumstances where it might be convenient, but nevertheless they could take an alternative route. Because I think there's absolutely no awareness of that level, because I think AI is almost being bandied around, again, in consumer products, I'll say, as almost it's this is more reliable if it's AI, this is better if it's AI, you should use this, and buy this product, software, whatever it may be, because it's got AI included in it. So I think we quite quickly probably have to counter some of that, to do it in a more ethically and responsible way.
Well,
Yeah.
can I move on to that theme then? I will just say that AI summary you get at the top of your search, a lot of guesses. We don't really know the real energy use, but one estimate came out that it uses 60 times as much energy as the rest of the search, as the old school search. So, but it's there. We're getting it, and if people find it useful, then we have that question. If these are businesses, they're providing something, and if people find it more useful than scrolling down and clicking on links, then who are we to stop them bringing that product to market? Which gets to this general question of regulation, which has come up at a lot of points. And so I'd be really interested in hearing some views about, should we regulate AI? How do we regulate AI? And in particular, we've got several questions around this area. How do we filter out companies which are not environmentally responsible? And so I'm going to kind of open that to the floor, and just kind of point out where Justin mentioned, regulating certain uses of AI. Of course, that is incredibly difficult, given that you can now download open source models and run them on your own computers. But also regulating the industry as a whole and how it behaves. So what are the regulatory mechanisms here? How would they work? Any thoughts from our panel on that?
Yeah, so I don't want to go all the time, but I think that what we're talking, I think we have to come back to data centers, because I agree we have a lot of difficulty regulating what everyone's doing on their own computers, but also the sustainability impacts of that work. The ethical impacts might be something, but we're not going to be burning down the planet with you running an AI model on your laptop. I think that regulation has to start with transparency. We none of us actually do know whether it takes 2 gallons of water to generate those images, because there is not enough transparency in the industry to understand what the worst case, best case scenarios are, and what the actual distribution of different kinds of data centers and different energy uses, etc., in it are. So transparency of the industry is absolutely required. And this process normally begins with these voluntary agreements and voluntary standards that over time will evolve into legislation at at the national or international levels. I think that it's much easier to do that kind of regulation around issues of energy use, because it fits into existing environmental, sustainability and governance kind of work that's already regulated. It becomes more challenging to do it around, as we said, different use cases, and it becomes difficult to do it with the supply chain of the materials that goes into that. But I think that I think there's a real there's a real potential that we get situations where even in the UK we see severe water impacts from a large scale data center introduction that might start necessitating some change and it could be regulation. That's one thing, but I also think tax incentives are also a part of this. It is very cheap to do this, comparatively per person for these companies. It has very little they don't have to employ people to get in this process. It's comparatively cheap. So I think that we could, prioritizing different users of water and energy that are relying on our grids or our water systems is a way that we could do this. And I think that that's something we should look into. But it requires public awareness and public energy behind that, so that politicians feel empowered to make those changes.
I mean, what I would say on that point, I think, and I know again, I'm not suggesting this is what you were saying, Justin, but what we do have to be careful about is that those with the most money can use these systems without sort of consequence, because some of the companies we mentioned earlier, Google, Microsoft, those, you can tax them, but
but
they can afford it. So
yeah, I don't disagree, and it's funny. It's the way our area I work in, a lot of it is to do with offsetting work, where that equation becomes simplified when you're saying the outputs of that tax go directly into offsetting the impacts of the damage. And in which case, I don't mind if Google want to pay 30 times over the odds for that energy and water, as long as that is sufficient to cover the sustainability impacts of that work. If that work if that money is enough to and it's directed after it's been paid back into the local water network and the local energy grid, and provides a net positive impact on those systems, then I don't have an ethical problem with them having more access to AI than other things, even though I think that I do agree that presents equity challenges. Hopefully that we can get to a point where we are regulating or taxing enough that it is causing all boats to rise. But that is that's a very idealistic, hopeful scenario.
I'm going to be honest, I would
bring
sorry.
Meghna in for a second. You again have a more global perspective than us. Are you able to get a sense of how different countries are responding differently to these issues of regulation? We're very aware of what's happening in Europe and what's happening in America at the moment, but there is a lot more of the world than that.
Yeah, so I think in South Asia, it's definitely there's a transparency issue as already mentioned, but the transparency issue might be 5x or 10x. So that's one of the major plot points. Other than that, I think even the regulation in terms of the environment and sustainability might be lower in those areas. So like the compliance part of it. So companies are much more likely to say either break the law or bypass the law. Those kinds of things might happen in South Asian or Asian countries. So that's pretty much what I have seen on the compliance and regulatory level.
Thanks. That raises the issue we've talked some time ago. We were talking about the energy and environmental impact of training these models, and then the energy use of what's called inference, which is when you're using them. And of course, the latter needs to be run in data centers fairly close to the user to get the speed. But the training can be done anywhere in the world. So there is the risk of regulatory arbitrage as people move their operations to countries with lower environmental regulation. We see this in lots of areas, and we've discussed this in the mining issue. So the regulation problem does sound like a global problem, and we need to think very hard about that. The other thing we've had in that interesting conversation is the importance of end users, understanding these things, understanding the consequences. We all know to turn the tap off when we're brushing our teeth. It isn't printed on our toothpaste pack tubes now. We all recycle these are cultural changes that have happened in my lifetime, which cumulatively have a positive environmental impact. And so there seems to be a story there we need to tell about that. We have a lot more questions, but I'm afraid we're running out of time. I'm just going to warn the man behind the scenes with the technology. I'm going to share my screen in a second because I think people are interested in this question of understanding the energy use, and it isn't transparent, but there are attempts to try to give you some sense of what is happening. And I'm going to share, there's a very nice little tool called Chat UI Energy, created by Hugging Face, which has you can select a few different models and you can use it like a normal chatbot and it will tell you the energy use of that query. For some, it's estimating, for some where they're running themselves, they can actually measure it. So this is being developed. People are onto this. That was only released a couple of months ago. This is very much cutting edge area where we're getting people to understand the energy use. And hopefully everyone in the audience today has a lot to think about and will go away and find out more, have more conversations, and we will start that path towards environmentally sustainable AI. I'm going to hand over to Andy for the last word.
Thank you, Tom, and thanks for the guide to that Hugging Face link. I'm sure we'll share that. Maybe the organisers can share that in the chat, as well as the link to the York Sustainability Forum and the York for Life portal. So we'll send links to the sort of information Tom has just said there. I mean, to me, that's really been enlightening, partly on the positives of the environmental use, as Justin and others highlighted, in terms of our understanding of the environment and freeing up people to focus on other environmental matters, but really also underpinning the need to decarbonize the energy system, to look at circularity of water use, and to address waste problems, electronic waste problems. These aren't simple things. So Meghna started with it's technically possible, but answer to the question, and those buts are quite significant. So keeping working on that is something that we will do at the university. I think the other side of things is behaviour change, and information to the public is only part of the equation. We've seen that with energy usage, recycling. Yes, we can all do it, but do we do it on every occasion we could, etc., etc. So even with knowledge, we don't always lead to behaviour change, and really looking at that from the social angle is critical. Energy and justice issues, even in the UK. I mean, Tom highlighted where some of the data centres are. Somebody in the chat noted that most of them are near London. You know, there's partly an equity issue in terms of what that means for growth in the economy, but also there's less water in the southeast than there are in other parts of the country. So, you know, I think even within our own geography, looking at where things are located, let alone the global nature of these things, the university has recently invested in putting its high performance computing system in Sweden, where we can get access to cheaper renewable energy, and cooling is easier for those data centers. So, you know, that sort of work is critical. The university is looking at using geothermal. If that comes off for York, that would be a real boon for our ability to use low carbon or renewable energy sources, and that's got to be critical. So I think finally the push there was for us all to have a voice as well. You know, Tom highlighted that these codes will be voluntary to start with. I've definitely learned about that image creation, image generation, and to avoid that and try and make sure others avoid it in their lecture notes or whatever it is. Let's use real images rather than fake ones. So I think there's little steps we can do, but we also all have to have a voice on that, and we'll continue to do that as a university, and encourage you all to do that as well. So with that, I'd just like to say a big thank you to our 4 panelists and for your inputs today, and for you all listening in. We will circulate the further information. I think maybe it's been put in the chat, some of the links to the useful sources as well. So I hope you all have a good rest of the evening and continue to engage with the University of York. So thank you all.